Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It is podcast day. We want to welcome you to the Citizens Advisory podcast presented by the Citizens Advisory of Pennsylvania. I am Jess Stahlnecker, Executive Director, and I am so happy to be joined by Ed Brunn today. He is a dad, a local school board member who has been fighting for conservative values and parental rights in education from the time he took his seat. And today he joins us to talk about a mental health app called Kooth, Kooth. Ed has done hundreds of hours of research on this platform, and what he has found is quite concerning. So we want to bring it to light. If you've never heard of this before, we're going to keep it at a high level today. We're probably going to have to do another episode about this because there is so much. But Ed, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for so much for having me today.
Can you just tell our audience what is Kooth? Like, for someone who has never heard of this and at a very high level, what is Kooth?
So Kooth, so there's what Kooth says they are, and there's also what Kooth actually does. And it's important to separate the two things out. But and just to give you some background on Kooth, where I come from with this, I have listened to experts talk about Kooth. I have listened to politicians talk about Kooth. I have seen Kooth from the perspective of the school districts and why they may want Kooth. And I've listened to Kooth representatives speak on the company. And, my conclusion from all groups is that this is possibly the worst progressive program in the United States. And let me tell you, so Kooth tells you that they are here. They originate from Europe. They've been there for a while. They will tell you that they are here in our school districts to help kids with depression and anxiety, which is born out of the supposed mental health crisis in kids. Right. And that's how they present themselves. And it's a really good, they have an excellent sell job. In fact, Kooth is currently it's in about 20 school districts in Pennsylvania. It is in no other school district anywhere else in the United States, interestingly enough, but they are currently.
Maybe that's a good time to mention that one of the things that was kind of eye-opening to us is that the U.S. headquarters is right in Fort, Pennsylvania, which is Luzerne County, which is where we are currently. And so, we sort of found that out. So it seems to me like Kooth is kind of playing around with their pilot in the U.S. right here in our backyard.
Yes, we are epicenter for the Kooth pilot project in Pennsylvania, and Luzerne County is like the primary spot for it all, which I find is ironic because I think they've run into Citizens Advisory, which we also headquarter right here in Pennsylvania in Luzerne County. So it is interesting, of all the places for them to show up, they showed up right in our backyard.
Exactly. Yes.
Officially, I wanted to mention they are a tech company. This Kooth, they are a tech company, and if I don't know how familiar people are, but there has been kind of a little bit of an outcry in our country that tech companies kind of turned into a little bit of the wild west, in terms of there is no policing of these things to some degree, and we'll go into more of why that's a concern.
Okay, yeah. So this is supposedly like a mental health app to help kids with anxiety and depression in school. It's free to the schools.
Yeah, so the state of Pennsylvania, using a block grant, so they could have used that block grant however they wanted to, but our state lawmakers decided to use that block grant to fund Kooth. Again, hailing from Europe, which I will mention is one of the most liberal and progressive areas of the world. Right. And that's where Kooth originated from. And they brought them here. And interestingly enough, and this is actually a very important point, in Europe, Kooth, when they did what they did there, in terms of helping with mental health, it was primarily a self-referral company in Europe. They did dabble a little bit in school districts, but most of their research and most of their work was as a self-referral company, which means someone saw a billboard or a sign or a TV ad and felt that they needed mental health help, and they would sign up with this company and they would seek the company out, which is wildly different than the way it's being presented in Pennsylvania, because it's not on billboards here. Instead, it's in school districts and kids are getting referred to it. So
Right.
that's an interesting dynamic to point out, because you may get very, very different results as because of that.
Yes, sure. Okay. So, and I think that this is probably a good segue into the fact that like there is a push for this in Pennsylvania by local lawmakers. We already have a bunch of schools locally who are using Kooth. I don't know, Ed, if you have the list there to name them, but I know Wyoming Valley West, right? Wilkes-Barre area, Wyoming 7.
Yes. Yes. So there's a bunch, Wilkes-Barre area, Wyoming Valley West, Nanticoke area, I believe is to go live in the next week or so. Um, I will point out one school that was supposed to go, Scranton area is another one. That's a big school district. The
Yeah.
entire Philadelphia school district is live on this program.
Okay.
And I will point out Berwick area was supposed to go live on this program, but due to the diligence of parents, after hearing me speak about this company, they immediately confronted the school board, and the school board, it's speaking of what the lawmakers talk about. The lawmakers don't tell everybody everything they need to know to make proper decisions on this company. Once school boards most school boards, once informed of what Kooth fully does with kids, they are quite turned off by the company, and they will actually cancel the program, much like Berwick area did. Berwick area got the song and dance of the positives of Kooth, but when they were confronted with the negatives and the concerns of Kooth, they immediately left Doc and did not take Kooth with them, is the best way to put it. So that's the good news with all this, is that there are opportunities to intervene on this company.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about why it's concerning. Because again, we know there's a mental health crisis amongst our youth. We know that it needs to be addressed. It sounds good on the surface, but what have you found in your extensive research that is like really concerning, eye-opening? And you said it's possibly the worst
Yes.
progressive program in the country. So if you can give our listeners some details on what you found that is kind of like the red flags.
Yes, absolutely. So there are numerous red flags with this company, numerous. Actually, the hardest part with this company is just keeping the numerous red flags in order. But let's start out with the biggest concern is lack of parental consent. I did not know any of this until I started to do my deep dive into Kooth. But one of the weaknesses in Pennsylvania is we must have it on the books in state law that allows kids as young as 14 to engage with Kooth without parental consent, which means if the school is paying for this program, a kid could access this program. And if they're over 14, the parent does not even know that the kid is doing this. And I will point out that in our local school districts, the age of consent is 14. But I do want to point out also, because this company, when we go into bigger details with it, in Philadelphia, which is a high population area within Pennsylvania, the age of consent there, I don't understand why, is actually only 11. So this company does interact with very young kids, and they will interact with kids even in our local school districts down to 6th grade, which is 11-year-olds. And they get consent for the youngest of kids, but even then they do consent under the umbrella of mental health. And
Right.
I think our listeners will be shocked to learn what this company means when they say mental health, because they want people to believe that means depression and anxiety, but mental health to them is an umbrella term that covers a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, so let's get into those things, because I think that this is where, parental consent is one thing, and obviously we want to know what our kids are engaging in. Good parents want to know what our kids are engaging in. And I think when you explain some of the mental health tools that they use, mental health, topics that they cover, I think that that's where the alarm will go off.
Sure.
So yeah.
So first thing I'll point out, if you, I have a Facebook page. We're obviously conversing here,
Right.
but I have a Facebook page where I did a deep dive in the Kooth, and I pulled in the resources that they were using in Europe. I read journal articles that Kooth wrote by employees of theirs, and I looked at much of their, and I guess the best way to put it is propaganda
Mhm.
that they that they facilitate to young kids when they were in Europe. Anybody could go to my Facebook page and look, all the photos, they're marked with Kooth. They're marked with Kooth, and they have strong propaganda pushing gender identity as a solution to kids' problems.
Right.
And they will use words that I mean, I don't think most 11-year-olds and even some 14-year-olds will have no idea what they are. It'll be their first exposure to that kind of things. And when kids enter this program, if they so much click on any of that stuff, it really takes them down a wormhole, a vortex that the kid may not have. Again, a kid whose dog recently passed away, they may be sad because of that, and
Right.
they get referred by the school district to use the Kooth mental health app. They go in because they're sad because their dog died, but then they get bombarded with left-wing propaganda. There are kids who are 14 who do not know what LGBTQI means. I don't know that I knew what that meant with the I, at least 4 years ago. Kids may just click on that because they don't know what that means. And next thing you know, Kooth will use that to initiate a gender identity conversation with kids, because in Europe, that was their bread and butter. That was their focus.
And I think that I've heard Amy, our vice president, who's also done extensive research on the platform, that the gender identity, like the transgender numbers in the UK, and I mean, it can't all be attributed to Kooth, but they've gone up like something like 900%, like in the last 4 years.
Sure. And I think earlier I had spoken about Kooth in Europe being a self-referral company, which is interesting because as a self-referral company, if someone is having a gender identity crisis, as a 19-year-old maybe in Europe, they may feel they need help. They would seek Kooth out and use their service. And I have some paperwork here, and I'll read it. This is from the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy, which is a peer-reviewed article. This is a quote from a Kooth research person. They found that young people who identify with identity issues are almost 3 times as likely to present with suicidal thought. So that's why Kooth, as a self-referral company, may have made some sense in Europe. However, and the reason I read that comment is because gender identity, per Kooth's own research, shows is highly associated with suicide, ideation, and self-harm. And that was where Kooth in Europe, behaving as a self-referral company, may have been helpful.
Right.
But I will point out to people that is wildly, wildly different than how Kooth is behaving in the United States of America right now.
Right.
Because in our school districts, kids aren't seeking Kooth out for a gender identity crisis. They are not going there for that reason. They're going there because maybe they're sad because their dog died. Maybe they're sad because they lost. My daughter dropped the ball that was hit in the air and she missed it, and she was sad for a day. If that was like the All-Star game, maybe she's sad for a week. So she's clicking, the sad face on the emoji on the rhythm app at school. She gets referred to Kooth. Next thing you know, she's clicking on LGBTQI because she doesn't know what that means. Right. Is Kooth going to initiate a gender identity conversation with my daughter because she clicked on that?
And let's talk about that, like what that might look like, because we know that there's a difference between a guidance counselor and a Kooth employee, right? And so these discussion boards, we know that there's discussion boards, peer discussion boards. Is this correct? Like in Kooth, there's peer discussion boards, but then there's also like moderators that moderate those discussions. So like kids, it's almost like a social media situation too, where kids kind of interact with each other. But then if I'm understanding correctly, the Kooth employees can also engage with these kids on their own. And
yes, correct.
Okay. And so these people we don't know what their credentials are, correct? I mean, we know what a guidance counselor's credentials are, but now we have
Absolutely.
Okay. So what do we know about that, Ed?
So to point out, and this is obviously another huge concern, when a guidance counselor is hired at your local school district, a guidance counselor, or even a janitor for that matter, we know a lot about them because an administrator interviews, hires, and gets approval from a school board who is an elected body to oversee the school. That is the normal process, and that has worked for 100 years in this country. That's what you want. It protects kids because there are a lot of local eyes on the project.
Right.
Kooth, in contrast, is a company that is, essentially hired as a contractor by the school district, but the school district is not hiring the employees. Like I have never met a Kooth employee who is speaking with the kids. And because of that, I have a lot of questions on who they are hiring and why. Again, they work from home, these Kooth employees, and they will be interacting with children in an intimate, anonymous setting,
Right.
speaking about intimate details of their life. And Kooth is very, when you look into them, they're very funny in how they word things. So they'll refer to employees as practitioners. Well,
Mm.
what is a practitioner?
And
That,
what kind of credentials do they have to have, right? I mean, what credentials do they have? We know
right.
guidance
So,
counselors have to go to school for so long. Like what?
and have licensure. Yeah. So in the state of
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, to have licensure to counsel, you have to have a master's or a doctorate and sit for a test.
Mhm.
However, so to be as a licensed counselor, which is obviously, people who do that are expensive. So it
Right.
appears that Kooth, in a way to get around that, this is a question I would love to ask him. What is your ratio of practitioners to counselors at your company? Because it appears that for every one counselor they have way more practitioners, and they seem to make practitioners sound more highly trained than they are. It sounds like they are just company certified people who are then allowed to moderate these forums. And
Mm.
it seems that many of them may have a agenda that does not match, you know, many of parents' feelings.
Right.
And so the practitioners do not seem to have licensure at Kooth, and they seem to be the ones that moderate the forums and interact with kids on the lower levels.
And regardless of how you feel about this stuff, I mean, if you're listening to us, probably maybe this is concerning to you, but my concern, I mean, the team, it says meet the team bios,
Yep.
they have their pronouns listed.
Yep.
And
Some of them are he and she, but many of them are they and them. A few of
Mhm.
them.
Pronouns
And
are
I will point out, in the British Association for Consulting and Psychotherapy, and I'll read this verbatim for
okay.
listeners. I think this speaks to the type of the training that these employees go get trained on at Kooth. And this is verbatim reading it. And again, this will be who your children are interacting with in an anonymous setting that you
Okay.
don't even know about as a parent.
Right.
These sessions encourage practitioners to become aware of their own gender and sexual identities, to promote curiosity and essentially empathy for young people. That is written by a Kooth employee in the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy. Because again, going back, as a self-referral company in Europe focused on gender identity, they probably believed it was good to hire people who could relate to people coming in with the gender identity problems. So again, maybe that made sense in Europe, but again, in school districts, are we doing that here? Because again, do we want to be promoting gender identity to kids? Because Kooth's own research shows that that is highly associated with suicide, which brings to me where I'm going here. How is the state of Pennsylvania paying for a company, Kooth, to do what they're doing and potentially increase suicide and self-harm by increasing gender identity issues?
Right.
That
Like,
and
and
that's my
this could be
huge
presented.
concern.
Well, it's a huge concern. I mean, this could be presented to an 11-year-old. I mean, I can't even imagine my 11-year-old, who is referred to Kooth because, like you said, maybe, they're sad for some reason that's
Unrelated reason, yeah.
unrelated, a normal lifetime event. Kids get sad. We all get sad, right? And
Right.
then having someone, pry and prod and like sort of, well, maybe have you ever thought
Right.
that maybe you're the wrong gender or whatever? I
Right.
can't even
Right.
imagine.
Well, just imagine, how many girls are made fun of for being a tomboy girl, and how many boys are made fun of for being a feminine boy. I mean, when I was 13 years old, I was called, kids will make fun of you and they'll call you gay, this, that, or the other. It happens. The problem is a kid who goes into this program, Kooth, again, sad because they lost the baseball game. And then the Kooth practitioner, who has no licensure, prods out of them. Well, they mentioned, well, oh, my friends make fun of me because I'm a tomboy girl and I like softball. Well, now the Kooth employee may feel that could initiate a gender identity conversation. Because again, this is not why the child has entered here, but at a very young age, as young as 11 in Philly and around here 14, a child could now be being told something that is not necessarily even true, but it's suddenly placed in their head. And at that point, a child is either going to do one of two things. They're either going to act on it. And if they're from a home that's not accepting, well, that's exactly how you end up homeless. If the child's family at home is not accepting of alternative lifestyles, that's how a kid ends up homeless and potentially, again, a risk for suicide and self-harm. Or if the child does not act on whatever suggestions a Kooth employee gives, well, that's like an 800-pound gorilla being placed on a child's shoulders at a very young, tender age. How is a child going to deal with that? If they're hiding something like that they don't know how to deal with, that's a risk for suicide and self-harm again, which is mind-blowing because this company was brought here to do the opposite. But I don't know that and I'll read this to you, and this is the stuff that's extremely concerning. This is from the BMC Public Health, a peer-reviewed journal from Europe. This is Kooth's own pilot evaluation from October 2022.
Okay.
And I'll read this verbatim. Many young people turn to the internet for advice and support, but little is known about the effectiveness and potential harms of online support. Right. And so here's Kooth will openly admitting they don't know if they're safe or effective. But yet this tech company has showed up in Pennsylvania school districts, and our lawmakers are feeding it money. And they're, again, we asked them, and we had talked about, I've had the privilege of watching Kooth speak on a YouTube channel, defending their services. They were asked point blank, are you guys receiving or providing any lobbying efforts or any financial incentives to lawmakers to push your company? This is a company we're asking to trust with our children, and they were giving answers like, not that I am aware of, which I will point out is not no. Right. They were answering, not that I'm aware of, which, this is, again, a company asking for us to trust them anonymously with our children. And these are the kind of answers they're providing. And the other thing I will point out too, and you had mentioned it earlier, in terms of a social media company, Kooth, my nickname for Kooth is, I call them Kooth Child Killing Mental Health Services, because I believe that is potentially what they may do.
Yeah, sadly.
But this company, you had mentioned social media earlier, and I would like to point out that social media, in study after study after study of peer-reviewed studies, has been shown to potentially be the cause of the children's mental health crisis currently in America. And think about what we are doing in Pennsylvania. We have just fed $3 million in grant money to a company that is a social media company. That is exactly what Kooth is. So are we using a social media company to treat a social media induced problem? And we don't even know if that company is safe, which is absurd, but we do not. And the company itself admits it in their own paperwork.
Right.
It's absurd.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, Ed, there's so much we probably can do. We could probably do a week's worth of podcast. And we're still doing our own research. We're still finding things every single day about this company, about what it is, about what it looks like when our kids get in there. We are following closely what it looks like in the UK versus here. So we're definitely, we still have a lot to learn. But at this point in time, what advice would you give to parents? I mean, first of all, listening to this podcast is number one, right? Making yourself aware of the fact that this is happening. But what can parents do? I mean, as far as like stopping this in their own home district?
Yeah, and I want to say, I keep saying in terms of like the Kentucky Derby of progressive problems, I feel like if people were to write a 1 to 20 list of like progressive problems they have and concerns in schools, I don't know that Kooth made the top 20. I'll be honest with you, I don't know that it made the top 20 of anybody anywhere in the state of Pennsylvania. But I will tell you, like the Kentucky Derby, where that one horse ran from the back of the pack all the way to the front, that's Kooth. They're going right to the front. They are likely the number one problem. Um, but I got some good news for people, though. The really good news is that most school boards are sold that this company is exclusively for depression and anxiety. They are not told anything about this company's activities in Europe whatsoever. And what I have found is any honest school board member who has genuine interest in their kids will not approve this program. What I will say is 20 school districts signed up for this program. That's 20 times 9. That's 180 school board members. I am not aware of a single no. It was 180 yes votes for this company, and I showed up pointing out what this company was doing in Europe, and this company has come to a grinding halt in Pennsylvania as a result of it. I have to assume it's because of my advocacy here.
Right.
But the good news is I can't be everywhere in Pennsylvania, but parents can be. They need to show up at their school boards with their school board members. They need to let school board members know, do not trust their state lawmakers with this. Do not trust them, because this is a publicly traded company. They likely have investments in it. They have a side agenda, which I could spend an entire podcast about why this company is being promoted as it is.
Right.
And I will point out, I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking like, gosh, these Democrats out there pushing this company, what else are they going to do? And I will point out that the leaders on this company are actually, more often than not, state of Pennsylvania elected Republicans, GOP, if people could believe that.
Yeah, so it's being pushed from both sides. I mean,
Both sides.
yeah, and again, you have to wonder. I mean, I don't think, when it sounds like a good deal and it sounds like maybe somebody is, accepting donations here, that whatever, we don't know what the financial dealings are, but it sounds like a no-brainer to them. I don't think that, I mean, they're not spending the time that you're spending, Ed, looking into this, because they don't care. They're not invested in each individual child like a parent is. So the one that you do, I mean, Berwick, right, is an example where
Yes.
it was stopped by parents, right, Ed?
Berwick area, I actually have the photo. Berwick area shows on the list of schools that was going to start on Kooth. And on citizens advisory forums, I had noticed Berwick disappeared, and I had asked, well, what happened? And parents told me that, when they heard the K word come out at the school board meeting, they were up in arms over it. And I would also like to point out, it's very important that parents proactively prevent this company, because once a school board votes this company in, they are more likely to defend the company than to block it, because everybody wants to block the company. Nobody wants to have the company, in their school district and then say, well, I made a stupid error in allowing this company. Then people start to say, well, it's mental health, and they start to defend it.
Right.
As a parent, you want to nip this thing in the bud before it has a chance to grow.
That's a great point. Yeah. Thank you for that. What kinds of resources can we do you have the links to those articles? Ed, can we post some resources in the description of this podcast for our listeners? They can maybe start to do some of their own research.
Yeah, I in Citizens Advisory, I have I think a multitude of posts.
Yes.
The one is from, I think, February 17th, and then I have a dated one. But those ones have all the photos, and again, I'm pretty diligent with links and sources. I hate when people, I always find people will say this, that, and the other, and they don't have anything to back it up. Everything is from Kooth itself. People could see exactly what they were doing in Europe. And, I think one of the most crazy things is, Kooth, when they were being questioned, they almost tried to blame our state laws for their existence here, which is, they're exploiting our state laws being 14 and up. And they kind of said, well, it's all they almost said it's your fault we're here, which I thought was the most ludicrous argument ever. But that is exactly what they did. They pretty much said, you guys are foolish enough to have laws to allow us to be here, so we're going to show up and take advantage. That was how I interpreted what Kooth was telling the public. Which is really crazy to really think about.
So crazy. We are definitely going to have to continue this conversation, but Ed, I want to thank you for all of the research and all the time you've put into this. I mean, I don't know if it wasn't for you, I don't even know if us at Citizens Advisory would be aware of how dangerous
Yep.
this app is. So
And
I
if I could say one more final
sure,
thing,
yes, absolutely.
there's a lot of left-wing groups out there who are going to be like, oh, like, listen to this guy, he's anti-LGBTQ, yada, yada, yada. I will point out, and again, this is why I will die on this hill all day long. There is no government organization at the federal level, that would be CDC, and there's no professional organization in the United States of America that recommends counseling about gender identity or speaking with a young child about gender identity through a computer. And I will emphasize the through a computer part. That should exclusively be done in person therapy with a parent or a friend, not through a computer, because that's called social media.
Yes, I could not agree more. And again, I think it's important, we as parents, I mean, I think a lot of us, we are okay with the way people are living their lives.
Right.
We are concerned with the push for this gender identity conversation with our kids.
Yes,
That's
especially when it
our
has
job.
especially when Kooth's own research shows that it has a high incidence of suicide.
Correct. And the fact that it's anonymous and that parents, if your child is 14 or 11 in Philadelphia, you'll never know. You'll never
Right.
know.
And there are plenty of parents who would want to hold their kids' hands through a situation like that.
Correct.
And at that point, Kooth's holding the hand. And I don't even know what licensure they have to do that. No
Right.
less through a computer.
Exactly. Ed, thank you so much. We're going to put some resources in the description of this video. And we want you to check out our website, citizensadvisorypa.com. We're also on Facebook, Citizens Advisory of PA, and Twitter, Citizens Advisory of PA. If you join our Facebook page, Ed shares so much great information about Kooth. And I just appreciate this like 5,000-foot view. And at some point, Ed, we are going to get you back on and we are going to take a deeper dive. So I really appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Jess.
All right, I'm going to end the recording.